really wonderful concept of what's good for the business is good for the family, what is good for the family is good for the business. And I think we lived that, and we lived that years before we heard her say that. And that really is kind of, I think, where that success comes from, is building the dream team is really important. We've seen that with our Hype Away work now too. It's really important to build that core, that dream team piece, and then partnerships can work.
Welcome to Critical Thinking Required, hosted by LBW. This podcast is intended for free thinkers, entrepreneurs, and knowledge seekers. Join us as we discuss relevant financial topics, explore with guests their financial journeys, and engage with experts in industries such as space, media and entertainment, real estate, and many more. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
You sound silly.
Oh,
I'm not the only one, honey.
Are you going to say hi in our podcast when we start out, because you're part of our 6 years?
Welcome to Critical Thinking Required. You're with your hosts, myself, Tim Bickmore, and my two colleagues, Dan Weiss and Nathaniel Leach. And today we have a special podcast for everybody. We're going to talk about the last 6 years because we just had our birthday, October 26th, if I'm not correct, Nathaniel, right? October 26th.
That is correct.
Was LBW's 6th birthday. So we thought it would be a good idea to talk about what's gone on in the last 6 years and reminisce a little bit and talk and honestly to give a lot of credit to our clients for allowing us to continue to do what we love to do, which is talk about finance and use applicable finance for everyone. So it was just fantastic. And I'm going to have, where do we start? I guess is a great question. And I guess that's the best part. That's the best place to start.
Where did we start?
Exactly.
Yeah, where do we start, Dan? You start us off. You usually do the pitch. Where do we start? I think we started hating our industry, but that's maybe jumping a little too forward at the same time. I have, this is now like my, I think, 17th year in financial services, different kinds of financial services. I think 12 years specifically tied to wealth management, whatever the heck that's supposed to mean. We all met at the same firm, doing different things at that firm at different times. So I was there first. Nathaniel came a couple of years after me. A couple of years after that, Tim shows up. We often talk about how we love finance, right? We're very different people. We've appreciated that, hiring people that are very different. We love finance, but there are some commonalities from a value standpoint we all share, even though our backgrounds are so different. And a lot of that has kind of centered around a love for the academics of finance and a hatred for our industry. And I'd like to say that was kind of getting better, but as we've evolved over the last 6 years, I think that's in a lot of ways gotten worse than ever. I just think we do more things about it now today, which is really kind of great. And the evolution has been very, very interesting. When we broke off, and we share this with people all the time, when we broke off from the old firm and formed LBW Wealth Management, which was at that time a pretty substantial risk, and we've talked about this before too, though we didn't quite see it that way, right? Like it was there, whether or not we chose to notice it or not. We really wanted to be more holistic, and so we wanted to form this wealth management company, but I don't think any one of us really knew what the heck that was supposed to really mean. So we ended up becoming an investment management company because that's the realm that we came from. But we knew that there was such a burning need for other things that we wanted to become this planning firm in addition to investments. And at the same time, the investment piece grew because we saw this huge need for really asset management, because we were talking about things that weren't liquid assets for us to manage just as much as we were talking about things that we can't manage. So we became this kind of planning firm, and that's very much still in the infancy within the industry. So we didn't even know what that looked like. And I won't get too ahead. I mean, we tried some traditional models on what planning looked like. That was terrible. And then before our eyes, we become this entity that really is very different, very unique in our industry, where we transact more so like a virtual family office, but for the public. And that's been a really interesting journey over 6 years. That evolution feels in some ways like it was yesterday, and in other ways like it was 30 years ago.
I would echo those. And even to go back before we jump into like the evolution, I was thinking about some of the reminiscing stories, and I still remember I would going to Nathaniel and Ying's condo at the time, and Ying making us her delicious noodles. It was just spaghetti is what I would call it. But it wasn't, it was, her nice twist on it. And she would feed Nathaniel and I, and we would sit at his whiteboard that he had at his house and start talking about what we wanted to do and where we were at. Which was just, those times were really, really good. There were long nights and long hours sometimes, but it was a great time. And the other piece as well, I think one of my favorite memories is that we found this business plan, and I think it was 3 to 5 years. And for whatever reason, I don't know who made the decision, but we decided to go, hey, let's do this all independently, and then let's come back and see what we all think. And that actually was it was a very novel idea that was actually very impactful that I don't think any of us really understood. But we all went back, we did it independently of one another, and we all came back with pretty much the same answers and the same idea and the same vision. And I think that's what was really, really powerful, is that we were all on the same page intrinsically, which I think has helped us grow, because this, as much as Dan said, we've evolved quite a bit. There's been a lot of, it's an uphill battle, and that uphill battle needs to be combined with that the same vision and the same tenacity to kind of move uphill continuously. So those are a couple of my favorite stories that I think actually really were helpful. Yes, Nathaniel.
Okay. So piggybacking off of what Tim was saying about the business plan that we all constructed, we all were very fundamentally aligned, which was great. But two thoughts initially that I have was, one, we were kind of naive in a sense that there were some holes, in the sense that, like, it's like I say with my marriage, in that I asked my wife to marry me when we were 4 months into the relationship. Now there were some reasons why, but that's external reasons why. But the building blocks, like the core aspects, the principles, we have very similar principles. And I felt like we knew that it made sense for us to get married. Like I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this woman. Kind of similar mindset to when we got in business together, in that we were very fundamentally aligned. The intrinsic value was there, but there are still some holes that we had to, that we should have acknowledged, which we didn't. But what was there was the willingness to communicate, which I think trumps most characteristics. And then there was also the understanding that if this didn't work out, or if things changed, that we could adapt. I felt like we all had that ability to adapt. I mean, I am probably the least amount, but with Dan and Tim's and my wife Ying's support, I felt like I could handle that. And I think I have, mostly. There's been some times where I wanted to kick and scream, but you guys have pulled me through.
Mainly
what?
You're kicking and screaming, probably mainly directed at me.
There was some Tim in there too. You're not that special, Dan.
Yeah, I would say that there's definitely, I've been kicked and screamed at a few times.
But
Daniel's
my point,
everybody.
yes, I have. Anyways, The reason why I mentioned that part is that we have, as we do with our investment management, as we do with our financial planning, estate planning, everything we do with our clients is based upon the concept of an adaptive framework, in that you can't be a stick in the mud at all times. You have to be able to move with the tide. Otherwise, the tide's going to kill you if you don't start moving. So I think that those building blocks were there at the beginning, which is why I felt relatively comfortable moving forward. In addition to the fact that I really like the idea of being in control of our own destiny, that once we made this step, it would be on us. There was nobody above us. We could not blame anybody else if we failed. It was all on us, which was both appealing and the scariest thing that I had ever faced at the time. It's been scarier things since.
We had some lucky we had some lucky bounces in there too, though. We had preparation is key. It really is. So when people talk about businesses failing, a portion that is not talked about has got to be the lack of preparation, and definitely communication. And we had a lot of people that were naysayers on partnerships. Remember getting all that slack? Oh, you guys are crazy for doing a partnership. They never work out. Well, that's not true. They can work out if they have good communication, and we got lucky that it jived very well. I think we've always treated ourselves, people we've brought in, like family. It's funny because years later, when we started this podcast, which I'm guessing we'll probably talk a bit about too, sharing all these wonderful guests, Diane Cedar threw out this really wonderful concept of what's good for the business is good for the family. What is good for the family is good for the business. And I think we lived that. We lived that years before we heard her say that. And that really is kind of, I think, where that success comes from, is building the dream team is really important. We've seen that with our Hype Away work now too. It's really important to build that core, that dream team piece. And then partnerships can work. There's got to be room for slack, and we've given that to one another, and we've all grown together. But there's a lot of things I think that came together, of which some we just got some good positions, lucky bounces on, but it's really worked out.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it is funny, going back and looking at the risks and the rewards when we first started and as it continued to build. But I want to just emphasize Nathaniel's comment on the evolution and the ability to evolve. I think the one thing that we've been really good at is that I don't think people understand on the outside how much our positions have evolved internally. And I'd give credit to all three of us that we've had the ability to put ourselves aside a little bit and say, hey, like Dan just said, what's best for the business, or what's best for the family is best for the business, which means you may not be doing what you're doing now going forward. And that's an identity change. That's a job change. And that's really, really hard. That's a really big transition that a lot of people in their careers don't usually have to make or don't want to make. And I think we've all been in it from the standpoint as a team. Like, we just have to work through this as a team, and everyone's just as important, regardless of what the position is or how much client facing they do or not facing or whatever that may be, and understand that everyone's bringing value, but that value is derived very differently, and being okay to change as those values change and change as the business changes. And we've done a lot of that. And I would say, and I would even just not give credit to us, but even like internally with our team members, Nathaniel mentioned Ying. We had Darren, who came on board with us a few years in, who I'll give a ton of credit to Darren to this day, that he helped us evolve from during our planning process in the early stages. And then bringing on an intern, Gerard, who also kind of took a step forward, and now having Gary as well as a team member. Like, we've had some really excellent people come through and help us continue to build and get better, really, honestly, and take on a lot of different responsibilities. And so it's just been really nice. And the last comment just with this, my little diatribe here, is I always like to tell people that I think we all had the idea that we're painting a masterpiece, right? And masterpieces take time, and they evolve, and you have to erase and write again and redraw. And it's a canvas, and that blank canvas is extremely rewarding, but can also create a lot of anxiety because, like Nathaniel said, you have to be the one that creates. You can't be the one that just is passively sitting there saying, okay, pencil, draw this. It's like, no, that's not how it works, right? You got to put pen to paper. And it's been very rewarding to do that as a team, because it's not fun to do it individually. It's like fishing. I don't want to catch a big fish by myself and not show anyone. That's not fun. You want to go with somebody else and do it together and show the rewards and go through the struggles, right? So that's been very nice. I do have a question for the group, and Dan, I think I might have you start. As we're talking about this, I'm thinking about like transition points, or like points that were very influential. And I'm just curious on what everyone's going to say, because I have like some very vivid, like this, I feel like this was a transition point in our business. And I'm curious, Dan, if you have any like early on transition points where you could like go back to a story and be like, this is where I knew we were taking the next step, or where we've evolved or shifted.
Transition points. I felt like there were so many of them. I mean, obviously there was the transition point of actually the new environment itself, which was very much built on support. And so that made it comfortable. It was really hard for me. I had more expenses, higher salary going into it. I had my wife and I had been trying to get pregnant for a long time, a couple of years. And then I remember like we pretty much had stopped doing that, turned focus on the business. And 2 months after forming LBW, we found we were pregnant, right? So my daughter is like almost as old as the company. And so, yeah, there was an early on transition of holy cow, how are we going to do this? Cause it's up to us. And then it felt like it was just like by the seat of the pants. Like I remember when we started, it was like, there was no planning really in place. There was no planning fee in place. We had some assets. We were so fortunate to have maybe 30 something clients come with us with like $14.6 million. And that was it. And so there was a fear of transition that set in after the fact, right off the bat. But I think it was really kind of covered by support. And then it just early on, like I've got some fun stories to share later, but early on, I don't remember a lot of transition in the first year. And I think it was just because we couldn't catch our breath. Like I remember people started flocking. We became very ingrained in Madison really quick. We had met Sandy Weisberger through SCORE that helped us flush out a few things in the business plan. He had introduced us to Jan Wilson, who did an article on us. And I remember, she quoted that, being in business was like being in a marriage, but with less emotion for each other. And, and there are complications that come from that. So I remember not a lot of transition in year one, maybe even year two. It was just like, keep your head above water mode. And I think the biggest transition that I recall that like sticks out for me, outside of just getting used to stuff, was really when we just felt like it just wasn't good enough. So we started doing like that traditional model where we produce like those paper tangible financial plans for people. And I remember people being like, this doesn't work, and us being like, why? You told us this information. And then it dawning on us, oh, because they told us this information. So it's not right. And there was struggles there and we didn't know what to do. And I remember like, how are we going to actually do this? What we are presenting is just not good enough. And so I remember that being the transitional point of scrapping the traditional financial planning model and digging deeper and going to data and making it agile. So I remember that as a major transition. And I guess the one before that perhaps was us really establishing ourselves in Netflix. And we can't give the name, but I think we're all very grateful for Patient Zero at Netflix and our person that introduced us to professionally working with Patient Zero, although the two of them will debate back and forth as to who was really first. But nonetheless, that was probably for me the first inflection point of what we have in front of us is an ability to help people that really aren't getting the kind of help that they can get in addressing things that just are not addressed in our industry. And so that was a big a big component to us. It didn't take long, but it wasn't immediate for that to really kind of catch fire. And when it did, I would say for the most part, things have actually progressed the way we thought they would. Maybe in the wrong timing, but the way we thought. We knew that what would happen is that would get us into other like-minded entities. And that has allowed us to, build on different components like understanding comp packages or stock options, stuff like that. So I think that was a huge transition from what is not being served and how we can kind of fit into that place, what our role is. And a huge transition is to how we actually make our services from a price and offering standpoint match that. That was like, to me, the biggest first inflection point that we saw.
What about you, Thany? What do you got for inflection points?
I mean, you guys can really speak to the macro sense, like as to the firm, from the switch from investment management to financial planning. I mean, I know I had some input in that. For example, like, it really irritated me when you guys would say, "Oh, here's this account, go invest it," and then there's a reason why I'm saying this, and then 6 months later, you would come back and say, "Oh, they need to take this much out," and I'd already invested it. So it from a short-term perspective, that really rankled me. And it was because we were doing just the investment management part. But what I think that most advisors are in the process of figuring out, if they know what they're doing, is that there's two sides of the coin. There's the investment management piece, but then also the financial planning, and then they connect. Like, what kind of insurance does the person have? Like, what are their expenses? What is their income? What are their cash flows? That's not really talked about, but I think that our industry, and Tim can really speak to this, is going through that process of understanding how important those things are. So I think that I would go back to Dan and Tim and I'd say, guys, what the it really pissed me off. And then that led to conversations about, okay, well, people who are in retirement, like how big of how much cash should they have on hand? Because it was mostly like retirees taking out not just RMDs, but taking out big chunks of money to, I don't know, go buy a home or a second home, or go buy an RV or something. And we were just it was kind of like we were blind, and we had no idea what was happening over here with people's financial lives, with the exception of them just coming to us when they needed money. And it just didn't connect. So we started talking about, okay, well, how much money should they have on hand? And then I think that led to further discussions about, so that was just my small contribution right there. And then for me, I think that my transition really started at the beginning of the pandemic, I think, is when that really started happening for me. When we started to change our revenue business model and started to say to new clients that we're going to charge a financial consulting fee, and you get all these services. And then if you want us to invest your money, we can do that. And then we're going to charge this. And that switched the gears for me, because it then led us to switching our investment management models. And that freed up my time to a greater degree, which then allowed me to start to get more into the operations, which is really where I'm pretty good in terms of attention to detail. So that's been great for me. I still struggle with it to a certain degree, but it has made the investment management portion job easier, in the sense that I no longer have to be looking for 5 to 10 ideas at any one time to invest somebody's money as it comes in. Instead, I can focus on the portfolios that we're already investing with individual securities, and look at it as a pool, essentially, instead of just these one-offs as they come in, which makes it easier for me to just take my time, learn and understand the companies that I do want to invest in, if at all, or invest further in the companies that we already are invested in, or get out as situations warrant.
Interesting. I love, you guys have great inflection points. I have a couple very vivid inflection points. I don't know why they're so vivid for me, but I would say that one inflection points where I started to realize the power that we could do from a planning perspective was when Nathaniel and I actually worked together on a client who happened to have some equity compensation packages for a publicly traded company. And this company happened to be going through a really interesting reverse merger type of a deal. And it was very complex because we had to understand exactly how the equity comp package worked from a planning perspective, taxation, all that. But we also had to understand the client's individual scenario. But then we also had to understand how this merger actually worked. And a lot of advisors could probably do what we did on the end, some from a planning perspective, but where they probably couldn't really bring it in was from the investment management side, right? To really understand the details and the nitty gritty of how this was going to work, because it was very unique in a lot of ways. And then we also brought Dan in just from a risk perspective. And what I started to realize is that the three of us had very different skill sets, but we could really encompass a client to a very, very high degree and bring all of those aspects to the table and bring it to the table to provide true value to the client. And I would say that client scenario was really the turning point for me to say, hey, we can really step on this gas and provide something that is very real and not something that is fictitious or that we're trying to spin or market in a way that doesn't make any sense. They're like, no, this is true value to the client. So I would say that's when I really started understanding that piece of it. I think Dan hit a little bit to expound upon it. When I started getting clients, another inflection point for me is when I started getting clients, as Nathaniel was saying, being like, this is what I spend, this is how much income. And I put a plan together, and then they'd say, we need money. And Nathaniel would, kick me and yell at me. And I'd say, well, that's what I was told. Like, what else do you want me to do? I'm trying to do my best work here. And so it wasn't just from Nathaniel kicking and screaming at me, but it was frustrating because I'd have to redo the plan. And that caused a lot of work, and it became pointless to me. Like, why am I doing this when I'm not having the actual information? And that's when I started saying, well, I'm just going to start fact checking our clients. Right. And that's really how our planning process really started to evolve. Was I was tired of clients, I don't want to say lying to me, because they weren't lying, but just being unaware of exactly some of these details. And these details, as Dan says all the time, are the fundamentals to build the house on. And if you don't build those fundamentals appropriately, then what we can do is, fundamentally, if we can then have those down, if we build the house, then it won't break. And so that's what we started doing from a planning perspective. And as we started to do it, where we're planning now and how our spreadsheets work and what our process is very different from when we started. But a lot of that, there wasn't any other big inflection points, because it was just continuous evolution and tinkering with the process. And a lot of that came from a lot of our employees. So I mentioned Darren. Darren was extremely impactful. Gerard, extremely impactful. And now Gary has been extremely impactful with tinkering and involving our process. And even with Dan and Nathaniel as well, and building that out and really starting to encompass a process that's ongoing, consistent, and, as Dan mentioned, very unique within our service and our industry. And it's something that I would say that I probably wasn't proud of our planning process when we started, but I can say today, 6 years later, I'm very proud of what we do and how we function, how we work. And where I'm proud about it is that we're actually providing value to the client. And that is a very hard thing to do as an advisor in our industry. And so that's been just a really fun evolution. Other inflection points, outside of that, bringing on team members are always a big one. Each one has been a blessing in disguise. And then I guess the only other inflection point that I can only talk to Ying about is when we finally brought these guys over and had them join us. But outside of that, I think that's all I got. Dan, I know you're always the story guy. You always got funny ones. What do you got for us? What kind of stories do you have to tell? Thank you for taking the time to start your journey of thinking differently and listening to LBW talk about stuff they love. Until next time.